for the comm department. I'm just gonna give the reins to Rachel, who's gonna just give us a little presentation. Also, she can introduce herself and who she is and kind of explain how, just like good tips for resume and LinkedIn. And if we have any questions afterwards, we can get those going too. So I'll just pass it on to Rachel.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emaan. And thank you for inviting me to be here again with you. So as she mentioned, my name is Rachel Noto. I am the Assistant Director for Field Experience and Employer Engagement, and that's within the SBS Pathway Center. Specifically, I work for the Career and Professional Development team. And I'm here today to give you a little bit of, tips and tricks on how to enhance your resume so it's ready to apply for all of those internships and jobs. And also we can talk a little bit about LinkedIn. As Emaan mentioned, if you have questions throughout, I'd love for this to be more conversational. So I may just ask you kind of like your opinion on a few things. So feel free to utilize the chat feature below if you feel comfortable. So I'm going to share my screen first. Let me pull up my presentation. All right. Oh, thank you for putting that in there. All right. Excellent. So you should be able to see my screen now. Perfect. All right, so and Odessa's unable to join us today, but this is one of my colleagues who's really awesome as well. She's a career advisor too, and you can schedule to meet with either of us throughout the entire semester, and that includes the summer as well. So a little bit of a background. So what is career advising and what we do? So you are able to, as I mentioned, schedule those one-on-one appointments with any of your SBS career advisors through Handshake. And we do a ton of different appointments, anything from resume review, cover letter review. Let's say you land that interview and you want to do a mock interview with one of us, we can help coach you through that. Or even if you just have like general career advising questions, or you're looking to enhance your LinkedIn profile, we're happy to meet with you on any of those topics and more. So we always encourage students to schedule appointments throughout the semester and the winters and summers as well. So we're here to help you. So please utilize all the awesome resources that we do provide for you. And the appointments can also be through Zoom like we're doing today. It can be a phone call. Sometimes there's an email option, but it's a lot easier to do it through Zoom so you can share your screen for like resume review and things like that. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so we're going to get started with what is a resume? So a lot of times when we ask this question, students are thinking, oh, it might just be like where I list my experiences. It's something that I submit to an employer to get a job. And all of those answers are correct. So a resume is a document that presents your educational experience, your relevant experience, and all of your qualifications in a clear, concise, and compelling way. So it's going to sell to the employer all of your highlights and your talents in one document. So exactly what I was saying, all your experiences and achievements. It's a gateway to getting an interview. So with any job that you're applying to, whether that be an internship, part-time or full-time, it could be a full-time employment position. You should always have a resume on hand, and each resume should be tailored towards that specific job. So you want to be, something that I always recommend to students is looking at that job application and seeing like what are their qualifications and skills that they're looking for, and how can I highlight that I have those on my resume. So that's why we always say to tailor your resume towards that specific job. So how I'd like to start going through resume building is per section. And this is how I like to review with students too. So if you do schedule a handshake appointment, I do prefer to go section by section so we can just make sure that you have everything that you need in your document. And I think this comes up later in the presentation, but a resume should be kept to one page. As you are a student at UMass, keep it to one page with your educational experiences. And we're going to go through that momentarily. Okay, so the first section on your resume, that's the heading. So that's where you want to have your name centered and bolded, so that's prominent, and also include your contact information. So of course you want your telephone number to be on there, an appropriate email address. So perhaps you can use your UMass email, but this would also be an excellent time for you to create a professional email if you don't already have one. So that can even be like your full name at gmail.com, or it could be like your first initial last name. So that's a good habit to get into to start creating a professional email. So this way, perhaps you could just have all of your job and internship information going into one inbox. You can also include in here your LinkedIn URL, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And sometimes students choose to include their address, and that's not necessary. But perhaps if you're applying to, let's say, a job more locally, you could include your home address if you live in that area, because that shows the employer that you're local and you're able to go in the office. You don't have to relocate. So the second section would be your education. So it says degrees completed and in progress. So what that means is, and this goes for every section of your resume, you want all the dates to be in chronological order. So what happened most recently, so what you're currently doing, to what happened in the past. So for that reason, you would list UMass Amherst first, and I'll show you an example of how this is written. You list your degree at UMass. So are you earning a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Science degree? What's your major? What is your expected graduation date? So these are all relevant things that you want to put under your education section. And perhaps you earned some awards or certificates or are in progress of earning them. You can list those in education as well. And sometimes some students meet with me and they say, oh, I feel like I don't have enough information included on my resume. What else can I put in there? And in this section, I include relevant coursework. So perhaps you took a class in the comm department and you learned all of these transferable skills and you worked on, let's say, like a capstone project that you had to propose to the entire class and your professor. So that's a huge accomplishment, and you can highlight that in your relevant coursework, and then you could talk about that in an interview with an employer. So that's something that you may want to consider including in education too. Next section is experience. So something really cool about experience is you can break this section up into multiple different headings. So sometimes students like to, for an example, let's say you're applying to a social media job, right? And you had a previous social media internship with a company. You can list a heading as internship experience and highlight that internship. So showing the employer that you have that social media experience. Or you can also say relevant experience and include that social media internship at the top because that's most relevant and most recent. So there's a lot of different names for the experience heading. So as I mentioned, you could break it up from internship experience, relevant experience. Also here it says research and volunteer experience. So for that reason, I recommend, go through all of your experience that you have up until this point and see what makes the most sense for you. Do you need to reorganize your headings? Maybe. But it's also helpful to just list all of your experience first and then maybe consider how you want to highlight them in the headings. And then the last section would be your skills. So what employers are looking for here, it's not just like all your skills in general, but they're looking for those like computer skills, any language proficiencies that you may have. So a lot of times students will say, proficient in Microsoft Office Word, Excel. If you have any experience with social media platforms, I'm just providing this example. I always recommend to students, make sure you have professional experience with social media. So don't just put that you have experience with Facebook because you have a profile. But if you are comfortable with putting Facebook on there, make sure you use it in a professional way. So perhaps you were utilizing the Facebook platform to help market for a company. So that's when you would include social media on there. Okay, so moving forward, I just wanted to provide an example here of kind of relevant experience. So let's just say you're a Starbucks barista and you're aiming to get an HR professional role. So this is what you did on the left. You served coffee and various beverages to customers. So thinking about how you can translate that professionally on your resume. So this is what we said here on the left or the right. Effectively communicated with diverse customers to provide excellent service in a fast-paced environment. So what we're showing here is we're using action verbs. So effectively communicated, you're breaking it down to show what type of population you worked with, diverse customers. The transferable skills here are excellent customer service. And it's also showing that you worked in a fast-paced environment, so you're working in a team and independently. So rather than just saying you served coffee, on the right here, this is what you're translating to employers, and they're getting all those transferable skills that they're looking for. So just keep that in mind, like as you're writing through your bullet points, take a step back and say, is this how I want it to be conveyed to an employer? Think about what may be missing, what you can add. And again, if you have any questions throughout, you can absolutely schedule an appointment with us. And Emaan, I think there's a few chats as well. Like if there's questions, you can interrupt me and just ask them throughout. So if you want to moderate that, that would be super helpful.
For sure.
Okay, let me move forward. Okay, and here's another example too. So you learned how to make many drinks and prepare food. How else can you say that? You managed multiple tasks simultaneously with a team to accurately fulfill all orders efficiently. So again, just another way to integrate some of those key action verbs, showing you're a multitasker, you work in a team environment, but you're also excelling individually in your work. So these are great examples here of how you can use something, maybe a job that you're currently in, and translate that to be an HR professional, right? So just something to think about. Any questions that came up throughout the chat on these? No? Okay. All right, so there's a little resume quiz here. So how long should a resume be? And you all can use the chat feature if you'd like to participate. I mentioned this in the beginning. And then Emaan, if you could just read the.
You've got 1 page. Somebody's saying 1 page.
Yep, perfect. Yes, so you want to keep your resume to that 1 page limit, at least for now, until you get more professional experience. So, you know, after you have like your first job, and let's say you have multiple internships and it goes over the page after graduating from UMass, then absolutely it could be over that. But for now, try and keep it clear and concise, that 1 page. Okay. Oh, and here it says adapt your margins and spacing for fit. Absolutely. So something I always recommend is to really highlight all of your experience first into what's called a master resume. So that's every single experience that you've had up until this point. That can be saved somewhere, let's say like in your Google Drive, so you have that. And I always say, have the master resume and then pull from that master resume what's most relevant for that job you're applying to, and then adjust the margins after. So the margins will move like your spacing around. So I always save that part for last. And then here's another question. What order are experiences listed in on your resume? So again, feel free to utilize the chat feature.
If anybody's comfortable, you can also unmute your mic. So whatever works.
Yes, absolutely. Any ideas on this one? This one's a little bit trickier.
I think I remember.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's like the most recent ones come first.
Yes. Yep. So chronological order. So most recent experiences at the top within each section, and I'll show you what that looks like. So excellent. So organize with relevancy to the position you're applying to, just like we talked about. So here's a trick too. If your most relevant experience is not your most recent experience, you can include a relevant experience section. So like how I was highlighting that social media internship, right? Let's say you're applying to a social media full-time job and you have a social media internship. Maybe you pull that experience all the way up to the top, even if it's not the most recent thing you did, but then you can rename the heading to relevant experience or internship experience. This way, it's the first thing an employer sees, which is the most relevant to the job that you're applying to. So how do you start each bullet point that details your experience? So this one, I very briefly mentioned it, but all bullet points begin with an action verb. So kind of thinking back to that Starbucks barista experience, how we integrated all those key action verbs in the beginning of the bullet points. And you also want to make sure that these action verbs are in the correct tense. So if you have previously done a job and you have since left that position or the position has ended, making sure your action verbs are in the past tense. So that's something really common that we talk about often. Yep, exactly. So here's some do's and don'ts. Do use keywords from the job description in your resume. So one way to do this is pull up the job description or the job application, highlight the relevant qualifications and skills that they're looking for. Any words that jump out to you, perhaps there's like a word that the company keeps using, it's integrated within their mission statement and their values, and it is found throughout the application. Make sure you pull in that word to your resume. That's going to stand out. And even if it's fed through like an applicant tracking system on the computer, those are the keywords that are going to be picked up. So something that you definitely want to get into is highlighting all those skills that appear multiple times on the job application. You do also want to focus on transferable skills. So that's something really big that we talked about throughout this entire presentation. What are the skills that you have that you're going to highlight to an employer? So make yourself seem confident and competent enough for the role. Don't use acronyms. So that's a funny one. So sometimes there's a lot of them at UMass, even within SBS, right? So an employer may not know what SBS stands for. So writing out College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. You don't ever want the employer to second guess what something may stand for. So make sure you do write that out. Or also, like, let's say you're in an organization. If there's an acronym for that, or like a Greek organization, spell out the full name of that. And, oh, this is a great one too. Don't use a pre-made template for your resume. So what we recommend is actually starting from scratch on a Word document. And for that reason, once you make your master resume and you end up pulling all that relevant experience onto your final copy, again, like I mentioned, your resume is going to be tailored for each specific job that you're applying to, but also it's easier to really tamper with your margins and make it look the best once it's through Microsoft Word. And then perhaps you can consider saving it as a PDF when you know it's good to go and you're sending it out to the employer. So that's just something to keep in mind. And also we recommend using Microsoft Word. Let's say if you're meeting with an SBS career advisor, and we can use track suggestions. So we're able to actually provide some feedback for you and you can manually go in and make those edits. So try and use Microsoft Word as much as possible. I think, okay, so we have an example here. This is just a sample resume of one of the students from SBS. So again, just going through exactly what we talked about, the heading at the top with the relevant information. You can choose to include your address. So here the student used their campus address and their permanent residency. So perhaps they're applying to a job in Tennessee and that's where their permanent address is. So for that reason, you'd want to list both. Again, education, this is how it's listed. You spell out University of Massachusetts. So again, not using those acronyms, spelling out everything. You include the location in Amherst, Mass. And then you list Bachelor of Arts in Soc, minor in communication. Expected graduation here was May 2019 for this student. You can choose to include your GPA here as well. And this person also included something about an athletic scholarship. So again, all of those things would go under education. This person chose to list just experience. So it looks like they listed a few different positions that they had, but making sure that, again, in chronological order. So most recent, summer 2018, all the way down through summer 2016 and 2017 at the bottom. second section here was activities, or third section rather. So activities here, they just included some involvement they had on campus, which is a great way to show an employer that you're well-rounded and involved in the UMass community. So again, just continuing with the formatting here in activities, similar to how it's listed in experience. So do you notice how this person listed, so they were a public relations assistant, so they list the title or their role title, then they list the company name, then they list the location, and then finally on the right, aligned right, they list the date. So keeping that formatting consistent throughout experience and activities is key here. And then at the bottom, there's skills and interests, kind of like we talked about, highlighting those relevant computer skills and any language proficiencies that you may have. And they also included some interest here. So, you know, as space allows, sometimes you're able to list that extra line about what your interests are, but not all the time. So if you do have the chance, absolutely, if there's like a hobby that you acquired during quarantine or something that you wanted to highlight, this is a great chance to do that at the bottom there. So any questions before we move on to just briefly talk about LinkedIn? I know it's a lot of information to process, but again, like I mentioned, you're more than welcome to meet with any SBS career advisor. You just have to schedule an appointment with one of us through Handshake. So any questions? Okay. Moving on. So who should I network with? Everyone, but this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. Oh, we have something that popped up in the chat. Emaan, do you want to read through that?
It's just Allison reminding us that this is going to be recorded, so we'll have this up on the YouTube page too if anybody needs to check it out later.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Allison. So who should I network with? So this is what I like to start off with during like the LinkedIn presentation, because networking is more or less like sometimes we get intimidated by the word, but it's just having a conversation. So it's similar to what we're doing right now. We're having this conversation, we're talking, you're networking right now by being here. You're showing that you're interested in this topic, you're interested in fostering connections with like-minded students and professionals. So you are putting in the effort now to network. So glad that you're here. So that's why I like to start off with this slide, because again, networking is having a conversation. You can be networking with family members, friends, family of your friends, you know, thinking about who is in your inner circle. That's kind of how I like to look at networking, like starting there. Like, who do I already know? Who can I have a conversation with to maybe discuss my career aspirations? Perhaps I'm looking to get a summer internship in social media and PR, and I know someone that worked at a PR agency this spring in their internship. Maybe I want to connect with that student on LinkedIn and ask if they'd like to have a conversation, because I want to hear a little bit more about how their internship went, you know, what they liked about it and what they may not have liked about it, and you know, how that helped them move forward in their career pathway. So again, going back to networking being a conversation, starting with who's already in your inner circle and working from there. So not thinking of it as bigger picture yet, but perhaps starting smaller and then expanding within your circle. So for that reason, one of the great platforms to help kickstart your networking is LinkedIn. And even when I was a student, I never really knew like how significant this would be, this platform. I never knew how big it would become. It's definitely grown a lot since I've been on it. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, wow, like these people have like this gold level status and they have 500 plus connections. Like, how do I get there? Right? So just thinking of it as, again, who's in my inner circle that I can start connecting with. It's putting all of your relevant experiences out into the public for employers to see, right? So once you have that resume solidified, like we talked about going through each of those sections, it's going to be easier for you to start developing your LinkedIn, because a lot of things will become more clear to you once you take the time to work on them for your resume and you elaborate on your experiences and skills. Then you can paste them into your LinkedIn. So it's kind of like a stepping stone, right? So you work on your resume, and then perhaps maybe you're drafting a cover letter and you're also working on your LinkedIn at the same time. But what LinkedIn is, it's basically a virtual networking platform that helps build and maintain your networks. So like we talked about, consider who's already in your network, which we discussed. Oh, the third one, that's a good one. So search keywords or companies that are of interest that you may follow. So what does that mean? Perhaps you're interested in working for HubSpot. So you're going to look up that company on LinkedIn and you can give them a follow. And then you can also be on top of like, you know, what are those projects that HubSpot's working on? Maybe their team's creating a new vision for their company and they're sharing some videos about that on LinkedIn. So making sure you're following and keeping up to date with what's going on in companies of interest. It's a great opportunity to highlight your elevator pitch. Yep, so not just relisting from your resume. Exactly, so you don't want to necessarily cut and paste the same exact bullet points that exist on your resume, because the employer, let's say you're applying to HubSpot, they're already going to have your resume in your application materials. So they don't need to be rereading exactly what's on your resume. So you should just be summarizing a little bit on your LinkedIn. Also on here, you can list skills and get endorsed for them. So something really cool about that is, you know, we really limit on your resume what skills you're listing. So again, like I mentioned, you're listing computer skills and maybe language proficiencies that you have. Whereas LinkedIn, you can list as many skills as you want and people can actually endorse you for them. So let's say, again, like you want to get a job at a PR agency and you have expertise working with that Facebook profile that you developed, people can endorse you for all of your great skills working on that Facebook platform for that company. So you can list as many skills as you'd like and then get complimented for them. So that's cool. And I also like this last point here. So you never know when you will meet someone to help you in your career pathway. So it's not only through like a LinkedIn profile, but also you never know like who could already be like connected to you. So in your, you know, not your first or second level contacts, but your family member may know someone who knows someone that works at a company, you know, so don't be afraid to just reach out and have that conversation again. So not just networking, but having conversations and talking to people about where you can envision and see yourself. And connecting with intention. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but something that I'd like to do is actually kind of take you through my profile just to give you an example, which is not perfect by any means, but I just want to show you like what it actually looks like per section. And then from there, I did provide this resource, which I can send to you, Emaan. It's basically just and I'll pull it up here. It's a resource that someone wrote who is like a LinkedIn expert. And he talks about how to build an amazing profile. But one of his first things that he recommends too, which is one of the first things I tell students, is really cool. You can customize your URL for your LinkedIn. So sometimes, I'll show you an example. Let's see. So do you see here how there's a lot of extra numbers? You can actually delete that. So usually after where it says linkedin.com/IN, mine would say my name, Rachel Noto, and then it would have a ton of numbers or letters. You can actually delete that and customize your URL. So that's something that you want to do first before pasting it on your resume, because you don't want employers to see all those extra numbers and letters. So we can talk about that. So here's the example right here. This person's name is Austin Belka, I think, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he just listed his first initial last name, got rid of all that funky stuff after. So just something to keep in mind. But again, I'd like for you all to take a look at this resource and you can read through it. There's a lot of great points here, but what I want to do is take you actually through the platform, because I like to show this to students visually just so you get a glimpse of, you know, how it works. All right, so pull this down here. So what I was talking about, if you see on the top right here, it says edit public profile and URL. That's exactly where you would go to do that. And you could just change that quickly. Something that you want to make sure you have is a profile picture. So I don't have the exact statistic here, but employers are extremely more likely to click on your profile if you do have a picture. And of course, making sure it is a professional headshot. So when we are in person again someday soon, we do have the option of, taking your photo if you come to the SBS Career Office. And I do believe that the Professional Career Hub as well, they take pictures for you. So if you do need a headshot and you'd like to get one in person someday soon, we're more than happy to do that for you. But of course, you can still have a professional headshot taken on your phone and just making sure there's a clear background. And you do have like professional dress, at least from the top up in the picture. And then you can also have a timeline photo in the background. So just for me, like I work in Thompson right over here. So, aspiring to be back on campus one day. So that's why this is my timeline photo in the back. Just tells a little bit about like where I work in the environment. Sometimes people, like, let's say they're a professional speaker, they might just have a picture of them talking to an audience. So it tells a little bit of a story about like what your work is. And then of course, listing your name and your title. So even as UMass students, you could say like aspiring PR specialist, or you can, really diversify like what that title is. And you can list a little bit more here about like, so this is where it's your about section, just summarizing a little bit about your elevator pitch. So as we briefly talked about that before, your elevator pitch is like that like 10 to 15 second speech that you would give to an employer. Like, let's say you're stuck in an elevator with them, what would you want them to remember about you, right? Or like, what's something that you can highlight about like your aspirations or your skills that you want the employer to know? Even if you're going to a career fair, like we always say, practice your elevator pitch, like really become confident in knowing who you are and, where you want to be. And if you don't necessarily know, I think that's wonderful too. I always say just having that confidence within yourself, like knowing who you are as a person, that will be conveyed as long as you are confident in delivering that elevator pitch, right? So here it just talks briefly about my role and like what my aspirations are. So that's something that you could be developing. I always say that's one of the first things you should do. So not only list your profile picture, but talk a little bit about yourself. And are you an aspiring PR specialist? Are you studying comm at UMass? What are you looking for this summer? Are you aspiring to land a summer internship with a PR agency? So list that in this about section. So that's the first thing that people are going to read. Also, activities. So once you really get into your profile and you start following those companies that you're interested in maybe working for, or maybe you just really like what they do and what they represent, follow them, and you can even leave comments on people's posts. And that's what activity is. So like I had made some comments on here. I graduated from this university and I was in the School of Business alumni group, and I just commented on one of their posts, and that shows up on my profile. So again, just staying connected to your LinkedIn connections is really important as well. And then here, experience. So this is what I was saying before, where you don't want to just copy and paste the bullet points from your resume, but just summarize in like a short paragraph, maybe like 3 to 4 sentences about like what your work is and what you do. Or maybe, you highlight just a few of your experiences. So like we talked about earlier today, you have your master resume, and then you pull from your master resume to the final copy. So maybe you think of your LinkedIn profile as like your final copy of your resume, what you want employers to know the most about you. And that doesn't mean you have to include everything, but those few experiences you have that are maybe your strongest experiences or the ones that you're most proud of. And then scrolling down, of course, you have education. So you could list your involvement at UMass, what your degree is, expected graduation date, things like that. Licenses and certifications. So this is something relatively new. And what I'm talking about here that's new is LinkedIn Learning that you all actually have access to as a UMass student. So Emaan can send you that link to share as well. But what that is, it's if you look on the top right here, it says learning on my profile. if I click on that, that's going to bring you to a whole web of all these different videos that you can be watching to, let's say, again, I'm using that PR agency example, but let's say you're looking to get more experience with Microsoft Excel. So you can click on LinkedIn Learning and take a free Microsoft Excel course, and you can actually earn a certification that you can post onto your profile. So that's what I did right here. So I had taken a video on learning more about emotional intelligence. I was like, what is this? This sounds really unique. I want to be certified in it. So I took a short course on it, and then I was able to download this certificate on my resume, or on my LinkedIn rather. So that's something to keep in mind and something that you can actively be doing while learning from home. So even if it's just, let's say it's like 30 minutes a week, I still think that's awesome because it's, something that's helping you, you're learning more skills. And one of the top questions that I receive from employers when I talk to them weekly is they want to know how students are doing at home. What are you currently doing that's going to help you get to where you want to be? So perhaps you're taking these LinkedIn Learning courses and other courses online, you're acquiring these skills that you don't yet have, but you're aspiring to still get them. So you're actively doing something. They want to know how you're spending your time while learning remotely. So this is really important to be thinking about. And then just the final things on here, we talked about skills and endorsements. So just some of mine, I put like customer service, leadership. I used to be an academic success coach, like that was my job title. So I put that as one of my skills. And I've gotten endorsed for it from past students that I've worked with. So don't also be afraid to, reach out and ask for endorsements too, if you're looking to add a little bit of that to your profile. And then again, scrolling down here, recommendations, you can also give people recommendations too. Let's say you worked with someone and one of your colleagues was a great support of yours as, let's say you did your first internship and they really helped you throughout. Maybe you leave them a comment just about how incredible they were. That'll also show up on your profile. And then interests at the bottom. So these are some companies that I find interesting, or I just really like what they do and what they represent. So of course I'm going to follow them and just kind of see what's going on in their world. So that's kind of like a very brief summary of what LinkedIn is. And I'm just going to pull up this slide here. And this is my last slide actually, but this is, I always say, a great way to stay connected through us is also through our social platforms. So we do have a Facebook, we do have a LinkedIn account, we have an Instagram. We're actively always posting things on here, such as upcoming jobs and internships, any workshops such like this, that we can be highlighting on there. And then the SBS Careers email. So let's say if you prefer to maybe not meet one-on-one with a career advisor, but you would like your resume reviewed and you just want to send that to our general email address, we're happy to review that through email for you as well. But that is all that I have for you today. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to hang out and help answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or just comment in the chat. I also just wanted to mention something really quick. We were talking how you mentioned the professional photos for your LinkedIn profile. So because today's the professional development day through the comm department, there is one of the peer advisors who is actually taking in photo submissions, and she'll be editing or photoshopping them to make them have that professional background or just give that LinkedIn touch. So I can also share my screen if you guys want, and I can put up the QR code where you can actually submit one of your photos. I think that's happening until 6 p.m. today. So if anybody's interested in that, I can also get that going.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and ask.
I have a quick question, actually.
Yes.
I joined a little bit late, so I'm not sure if you went over this. It's about resumes.
Yes.
But at the bottom of your resume where you put skills and interests, did you talk about writing beginner, intermediate, and I just was wondering if you could explain when we should put that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I didn't get into that much detail about it, but I think this is a great time to highlight it. And so what I did mention was a lot of times students will break down their skills into like computer skills and language skills or proficiencies. So under computer skills, if you list, let's say you're most comfortable with like Microsoft Office, Word, and Excel. So you could say comfortable with or experienced in that because you're highly confident in your ability to utilize that. But perhaps let's say you're just starting to learn how Zoom works. So you could say, you know, beginner at Zoom or like entry level experience with Zoom, because that's showing the employer that you know a little bit about it, but you're not an expert yet. Or again, listing that term intermediate experience with or in is nice to do as well, because that's going to give them a glimpse of like how much experience you have or how much training you may need to get up to that highly qualified level. But again, like all of these, you know, something to summarize this great point that you brought up is all of these tools can be learned and taught. So don't think that because maybe you have beginner or entry level experience that you shouldn't put it on there. Let's say there's something that they want you to use, such as like Photoshop, and you're not that comfortable with it, but it's listed on the job application and you're familiar with it, put familiar with Photoshop on your resume, because that's going to show them, oh, she's aware that she'll be utilizing that tool and she's eager to learn a little bit more about it. So.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. That
Yes.
helps a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I always say this too with social media platforms. I think I mentioned this before, but if you don't have like professional experience with it, like you haven't used it in an internship or something, I would leave it off, because they're going to assume like you have, you know, really utilized it in a professional manner, such as like acquiring more followers or putting out campaigns or special things like that. So I always recommend to students, just leave it off unless you're comfortable, you know, talking about it in an interview. Any other questions that came up? And if not now, I'm happy to drop my email in the chat here, just because sometimes like after a workshop, like things start to like marinate and you're like, okay, like I wish I asked this now, like now I'm thinking about it, but feel free to email me at any time. I love having conversations. So I'm just really eager to help you in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm also just going to put the link to the SBS Advising Center like back into the chat too, so people can check that out if they need to.
Okay.
And then I also did put the link to the LinkedIn tips that you had up for a little bit. You're sharing your screen about. I put that link in the chat as well. So
perfect.
Yeah.
There was I'm sorry to just jump in there. There was one other link I wanted to share that I'm gonna find. Let me see. It was the one on the LinkedIn Learning access. Let me just pull it up. So every UMass student does have access to this, and I highly recommend it because, again, like I mentioned, like talking to employers, they're like, what have students been doing? If you really haven't been doing much, like this is a great time to like start using this tool because it's awesome. They have so many different courses on there, and literally your LinkedIn profile is linked to this. So just as you saw on mine on the top right, you just click on the LinkedIn Learning button and it's like connected to your account. So that's a really cool feature. And then something as well too, like I always recommend don't put your LinkedIn URL on your resume until you're confident in showcasing it to an employer. So let's say it's not fully developed yet and you don't have, you know, a lot of connections yet, that's okay. But that could be maybe like a long-term goal of yours, like for the end of the summer, you know, like thinking about it now till the end of the summer, I want to have like 200 plus connections and have all my experiences highlighted on there. So in the fall, I could start applying for full-time jobs, right? So kind of thinking of it as like a multi-step process. So you don't have to do it all today, but just let it like sink in and think about how you want to, you know, set those goals for yourself.
Awesome. If anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to ask. I know Rachel put her email in the chat as well in case.